Investigators, and those who want to be investigators, I have a couple of questions for you. What are the most important skills or attributes that you have? What are you doing to improve those skills? In this episode, we're going to get some answers to last episode's murder investigation exercise that we did with the crime scene at the motel. And we'll also talk about the most important skills an investigator needs to be successful. So stick around.
Welcome to Nothing But the Truth, the podcast about investigations and how you can become a better detective. This is the no BS, no Hollywood nonsense real deal. Now here's your host, Detective Ram.
Welcome back. I'm glad you're joining me again for this fourth episode of Nothing But the Truth, the podcast that helps you improve your investigations by helping you become a better investigator. If you're a private investigator or you want to be, or you're someone that works in the criminal justice field and, your job touches investigations or vice versa, you're in the right place. I'm Ramesh Nyberg, Detective Ram. I'm a retired homicide investigator, and I want to share my experiences on the job with you. It's always been important to me when I was on the job, and it still is, that we as an industry have quality investigations. Why is that so important 15 years after I've retired? Well, the public needs to have trust in both public investigators and private investigators. And that's why I do this podcast. That's why I wrote my book, The 10 Must-Haves to Be a Great Detective, which, by the way, is available on Amazon as a Kindle ebook or paperback. But in this podcast, I also want to find out who you are. Will you please let me know? You can drop me an email at truth@nybergpi.com. That's truth like nothing but the truth at Nyberg, Nybergpi.com. You can also go to the Patreon page for this podcast, and you can become a patron of the show, which would be wonderful, and we can have discussions there. You can also find our Facebook page, Nothing But the Truth, and we can talk there. I would love to hear from you. I would love to hear your feedback, and I would like to find out where you are in your journey as an investigator. On the last episode, we talked about the murder of a man in Miami. This was an actual case from 1987 that I worked on. We went over the crime scene details, and I asked you to do an exercise with me, and that was to start your lead sheet as if you were actually working on the case. And I've got some interesting feedback already from a couple of listeners, which was really great, and I'm going to read one of them to you in just a moment. The idea here was not to solve the case because you really didn't have the tools or the time to solve the case, because that case, by the way, took 17 years to solve. But really that exercise was for you to understand how to initiate the investigation and how to put your lead sheet together, how to list leads and create leads based on the information you are given and your observations. So here's some feedback I got from David. David's from Miami. And David, thank you very much for sending me your synopsis of the case and how you would handle it. So David says, okay, I'll take a stab at this. No pun intended. Nice one, David. I like that.
Good.
The victim, who recently moved to the area, invited another man up to his room. The two consumed 4 beers, probably after already drinking at the motel bar. I don't know where you got that from, David, but okay, we're going with it. At some point, they decided to get physical, and victim got in bed with just his underwear. The killer, disrobed, based on his size 9 shoe, had undersized equipment, which caused a derisive comment from the victim. David, you've got a great imagination, but that's okay. This is really good stuff. The killer is enraged and grabs a lamp and smashes the victim on his head, causing blood spatter on the headboard. The killer thinks he killed the victim, but then he sees that the victim is not dead yet, so he drags or carries him to the tub, runs the water to drown him, and when that takes too long, tosses in a clock radio, which has insufficient wattage, so then tosses in the toaster to electrocute the victim. Now satisfied that the victim is dead, the killer puts him back in bed, desperately hoping that it might look like an accident. The killer hurriedly tries to wash up, leaving watery bloodstains in the sink and a messy crime scene. Not a robbery, because the victim's car and items of value are left behind. Blunt trauma killing is more indicative of a crime of passion or rage than a planned murder or robbery. Very insightful, David. Besides, a robber would have checked the dresser for valuables, leaving a bloody footprint, which he didn't. There was a bar and grill near the motel room, so the victim and killer may have met there. So I would interview the bartender. That's excellent. The waitstaff, and canvass the other motel workers and residents for any information to identify the killer. Outstanding. Run DNA. I'm saying outstanding, not David. Run DNA on all blood stains to see if any of them do not match the victim in hopes of identifying the killer. Ditto for fingerprints, although it's a crappy motel room, so there will likely be a ton of those. So, how far off am I, he says. Well, David, you're kind of far off, but that's okay. As I said before, this exercise was done to learn how to create a lead sheet and make sure we cover all the bases. And you did cover some of the bases, which is really good. So here's what I hope that you all have put on your lead sheet. First and foremost is an area canvas, which David mentioned, and that's absolutely important. So what is an area canvas? That's when we go from room to room and knock on all the doors and talk to all the motel guests. What if they're not home? What if they've already checked out? What if a couple of the guests or many of the guests that checked in with the victim at the same time as the victim have now left? What do we do then? Do you guys know the answer to that? The answer is you get their names and their contact info from the front desk and you seek them out. If they're in Des Moines, Iowa, you better call them up in Des Moines, Iowa. If they have material information that might help you, you might be going to Des Moines, Iowa to take a statement. We'll get to that stuff later. So the area canvas is absolutely important, and you have to make sure that you cover all the bases and try to account for everyone that was there at the time. Now, we'll talk later about how you do an area canvas because there are ways to do it and there are mistakes that people can make when doing an area canvas. Talking to the motel manager. Well, I put in the case summary that we had already spoken to the motel manager, but there's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't go back and speak to him again and again. Remember, when we talked about in episode 2 of this podcast, we talked about how important it is to understand the definition of an investigation. And if you recall, the two most important elements of what an investigation is were that it was a detailed inquiry and a systematic examination. So systematic examination means that you may have to go back and talk to people more than once. You may have to try knocking on the door more than once or twice or 3 times. That's the way it's really done. Okay, David mentioned some of his theories about the victim and the killer having sex. That's absolutely a possibility. There's nothing on our scene that really indicates one way or another whether that's really what happened. But it's certainly a theory. One of the theories that we talked about was either a lover or a prostitute coming in and maybe being robbed by a third party. The important thing was, let's get these leads down. So we've got an area canvas. We're talking to the motel manager. The other thing that is absolutely essential is contacting the victim's family. And if that means going to Texas, maybe we have to go to Texas. But what we would normally do in that situation is contact the authorities where the victim came from and have them make what's known as a next of kin notification, inform them that this gentleman was found deceased, and see if they have any information. If they have a fair amount of information about where he was going, who he was going to see, and maybe if he had some enemies or some relationship problems, things like that, that's when you may have to hop on a plane and go to Texas and talk to these people in greater detail. Now, whether your budget is okay with that or not, that's a different matter altogether. In a perfect world, we're going to Texas and we're sitting down with the family because the victim's family, especially in a case like this, where you have really no other viable leads to work, they're going to have the most information about the victim's lifestyle, the victim's habits. Remember, to investigate the death of someone like this when you have little to go on, you need to know them as intimately as you would know a friend. You need to know where they like to eat, what they like to drink, if they smoke, what type of places they go to, what type of movies they like to watch. This is going to formulate a profile of them that will help you understand what activities might have taken place before the murder. Now, let's go to the rest of David's theory. And, as far as the evidence in the bathtub and things like that, it's not beyond the realm of possibility that he washed the victim off. But I will tell you this, moving dead weight is very, very difficult by yourself. So it's not so plausible that he would move the victim to the bathtub and then move him back to the bed. What is more plausible is that he washed himself off. The killer washed off his face and arms and hands in the bathtub and in the sink. There's no question that with a scene like this, our killer will have a fair amount of blood spatter on his person, on his clothes, on his shoes, obviously, on his face and hands. What other leads will we need to do? So there's a bar and grill there, right there in the parking lot, next to the roadway, next to the major road there. Yes, of course, you'd want to go there. You would want to have a picture of the victim. And of course, you don't want to use a picture of him in death. You want to find a picture from perhaps a jail booking photo or a driver's license photo from Texas or whatever you can get, and show that picture to the bartender, show it to some of the other patrons. Hey, have you seen this guy in here? He just checked in 3 or 4 days ago. Have you seen him having a drink in here? Bartenders are excellent people to talk to because very often they'll engage in conversation with someone and they can give you little details about what's going on. Now, remember, I told you, find out as much as you can about the victim. Find out what they drink. Maybe, if you're asking the family, did he drink? And they say yes. Don't stop there. What you want to ask next is, what did he drink? Did he like bourbon? Did he like scotch? Did he like gin? Did he like to drink just beer? If you can get it down to a brand, and I'll tell you why, the bartenders will engage in conversation with people, and they won't even know their name. What they'll know is what they drink. When I've gone to talk to bartenders in similar situations, one of the first things they'll tell me is, hey, you're describing this guy. What did he drink? Oh, well, I'm not sure. He was, 6'4" and wore glasses and had short hair. Oh, that guy, yeah. Cutty Sark and water. And they'll tell me what he drank because that's how they remember people. So those are the main leads you need to do. Of course, there could be more, and what hopefully happens during your area canvas and your interviews with the family, the bartender at the bar and grill, the the motel manager, is that'll generate other leads, right? There's often a kind of a domino effect with that. So that's what you're hoping to do, is get some deeper understanding of what this victim's activities were and who he was with, who he was communicating with prior to the murder. Now, do you remember that I told you he was in the garment business and that he had just moved to the area because he got a new job here in Miami? That might be important too, right? Find out where he was going to work. You might have to assemble a list of all the garment distribution companies there and start calling them until you could figure that out. Or you might have to go through his personal papers in his car. Maybe you'll get a phone number on a slip of paper, something that'll help you identify where he was going to work. Find out there from the manager or the owner of that business, when's the last time you talked to him? Did he tell you what he was going to be doing, or was he having any particular problems? Technology and forensics are wonderful. They're irreplaceable with what they can tell us. But what's also irreplaceable is talking to people. Investigations will always be about talking to other human beings, getting viable information from them. All right, so we've talked enough about that. Let's move into the next logical sequence here, is what I talked about at the outset of the show, and that was, what skills are you using to be a better investigator? We just went through an exercise about learning how to make a lead sheet. Now, that sounds very basic and very fundamental, but if you're not organized and you're not taking good notes, for example, you're going to get lost, especially if you work multiple cases at one time. And if you're doing a lot of business, and trust me, when I was in Homicide for those 22 years, we did a lot of business. We got cases when we didn't want to get them, when we were very busy. Your supervisor would come by and say, hey, we got another one. Let's go. Saddle up, get your pad. Let's go. So it's important to have a separate legal pad, for example, for every case. Don't think that you're going to take all your notes on one legal pad for 5 different cases, because you're going to find yourself getting extremely confused. I've seen it happen. So that's one of the first basic things you need to understand, and keep your information organized. And you do that by starting a lead sheet. Your lead sheet kind of tells you, it's a running account of what you've done, what you haven't done, and if you're working on a team, who else has been working on those particular leads. When I worked in Homicide, we worked on a squad of 4 to 5 detectives, and one of those detectives would always be designated as the lead investigator. The lead was responsible for disseminating those individual investigative leads to the other team members. And we would always come back and meet pretty frequently. If we were working a fresh case like this, we would meet at least once a day, maybe twice a day, to just come together, put our heads together and say, hey, what did you find out? What did you find out on the area canvas? What did the next of kin tell you? What new leads do we have to work together? Does that make sense? I hope so. So let's talk about some of these important skills. Number one is understanding the realities of your profession and the boundaries of your profession. If you're a private investigator, you need to know what you're legally able to do and not able to do. And if you've read my book, The 10 Must-Haves to be a Great Detective, you'll see that Chapter 1 is about understanding realities. Number 2 on the list of the 10 must-haves to be a great detective is keeping an open mind. Now, especially in a case like this guy killed in the motel, you can't jump to conclusions. It's okay to have theories. It's okay to write down those theories. And then what you do as the investigation progresses is you start plugging in the facts that you've learned to test those theories and see if they're still viable. And you'll start eliminating them one by one. Number 3, know how to deal with clients. Now, this is a little bit more on the business side of being a private investigator, so I'm not going to go into that a whole lot. I'm going to have an entire episode one day about the business of being a private investigator. I'm not an expert in that. I'm not a business consultant. If you want to talk about how to market your business or market yourself as a private investigator, that's a whole different conversation than the skills that we're talking about. Number 4 is research tools and resources. So research tools and resources are online sources, books, libraries, government public records. There's hundreds, maybe thousands of different resources that you can access as a private person. It's also people. Look for people who are experts in particular fields. Avail yourself of as much information as you can about the particular realm you're working with and the victim. For example, our man in the motel, I'll keep going back to him. The garment business, how does that work? How do traveling salesmen go show their sample clothing, and how does that whole process work? It's important to know. Number 5 in my book is called Wheels and Techie Stuff. Now, we're talking about your vehicle and equipment like cameras, small cameras, big cameras, camcorders, binoculars. All those kinds of things are important to have, but you don't want to overspend. You want to focus on the actual investigative skills that you're using, the person-to-person skills, the communication skills, more than that. The rest of the stuff, I would look at that on a case-by-case basis. You can go to these private investigator conferences where they have the booths, the display booths with all the vendors. You could probably plunk down thousands of dollars on all kinds of really cool cameras. How often will you use them? I'm not so sure. But instead, let's talk about the other things that we can improve on, our own personal attributes. Number 6 is a tricky one because number 6 is understanding human behavior. Sometimes that just comes with experience. You can take psychology courses. That's a great idea. If you are a student of criminal justice, there will be some things in there that will probably help you understand the motivations for crime. But you'll also want to find out about how people communicate, the motivations that people have for telling the truth, for example, when you're interviewing witnesses. So understanding human behavior helps us understand patterns. Solving crimes is very often about recognizing patterns, not just in the evidence or the forensic aspects of a crime scene, but recognizing patterns in the way people do things. We're creatures of habit, and we're creatures of convenience. We don't like to go out of our way too much to do things. You try and piece together why someone is doing something or where they're most likely to be doing it. And sometimes that can help you answer questions and put together certain pieces of whatever puzzle you're trying to assemble. Number 7 in the book is interviewing skills. And I'm only going to touch on this very lightly here because it's an essential. If you can develop some really good interviewing skills and learn how to take witness statements, you'll be way ahead of probably 95% of the private investigation world. Most people don't know how to do this, and it's not their fault. I was very fortunate to have been trained in doing this, and we interviewed witnesses and took witness statements and suspect statements all the time. This was something that we had to do with particular guidelines in mind, with particular techniques and strategies, because these had to be the types of statements that we could bring to a prosecutor who could eventually incorporate it into their trial strategy and the presentation of a case in court. I have an entire training program on interviewing skills that will be available soon, and I'll do a completely separate episode on the strategies and techniques that you can use to get information from people. Number 8, surveillance techniques. Now, that's something that is not terribly difficult to learn, but there are some nuances involved there that can help you really kind of streamline what you do and do it better, and that's also discussed in detail in the book. Number 9 is having an investigative system. That's something that you do every time, right? It's the way you start with a new legal pad. It's the way you put together your invoices for your clients. It's the way you organize your day. I like to start every day with a lead list of my own. What am I going to accomplish today? However you do it, if it's successful for you, stick with that. Make that your investigative system. Do you work with a partner? Do you contact other investigators and team up with them? Sometimes that's great. Sometimes there's work you can do by yourself. Surveillances, for example, jumping back to number 8, try and always do a surveillance with a partner. It's a lot easier, and you have a lot less chance of losing somebody when they suddenly decide to be on the move. Last but not least, number 10, this one's my favorite, persistence and attitude. You're never going to be a good investigator unless you learn to block out negativity, unless you approach every investigation with the idea that you're going to solve it and that no task is too great for you to accomplish. Persistence just means not getting discouraged, because trust me, you can get very discouraged when people hang up on you, refuse to return your phone calls, you knock on doors and nobody answers. People get angry at you and say, "Stay out of my life." Now, this happens more to private investigators than it does to law enforcement personnel, although law enforcement personnel get snubbed too. However, we had recourse. We could go get a subpoena if a witness was not cooperating with us. But in the private investigation world, you don't have that luxury. So you have to learn to finesse people a little better. But it really comes down to persistence. It comes down to having a can-do attitude and sticking with it. Remember, systematic examination, detailed inquiry. Things sometimes have to be done over and over and over again before you can get the desired results. Hey, this was a lot of fun. I hope you learned something today. We just scratched the surface with these 10 must-haves. If you want to get those in more detail, please pick up a copy of the 10 must-haves to be a great detective on Amazon as a Kindle ebook or in paperback. And I haven't talked to you about Buzzsprout yet. Buzzsprout, B-U-Z-Z, sprout.com. Buzzsprout is my hosting platform. And I got to tell you, before I started this podcast, I had never done a podcast before. I knew absolutely zero about the process, about where to start. And I found Buzzsprout, and it's been an absolute joy and a pleasure. They make it so easy. And I mention this because maybe you're interested in creating your own podcast. Maybe there's something you're passionate about and you want to get the message out to people. So following the link in the show notes for Nothing But the Truth lets Buzzsprout know that we sent you. And if you end up signing up with Buzzsprout, you'll get a $20 Amazon gift card for a paid plan, and it helps support our show too. We use Buzzsprout, and I'm telling you, like I said before, it is just great. Whenever I do something new, I usually end up having to contact tech support for some I have not contacted tech support at Buzzsprout once because they lay it out so easily for you. Start with some gear that you already have in a quiet space. If you want to upgrade, Buzzsprout has tons of guides to help you find the right equipment at the right price. Buzzsprout gets your show listed in every major podcast platform. You'll get a great-looking podcast website, audio players that you can drop into other websites, detailed analytics to see how people are listening, and tools to promote your episodes, and a lot more stuff too. Podcasting isn't hard when you have the right partners, trust me. The team at Buzzsprout is passionate about helping you succeed, and that really comes through when you go there and read through the information on their website. You'll see what I mean. Join over 100,000 podcasters already using Buzzsprout to get their message out to the world. Well, thanks for being with me again. This was really great, and I'm looking forward to our future episodes. We're going to have some fantastic guests on. We're going to have interviews with some attorneys, some investigators, and some authors of some true crime books. So please stick around for those. So I look forward to being with you again on the next episode. Remember, always put your best foot forward, but don't forget to work on your other foot. And I'll see you guys soon. Thank you.